Well, I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I was an 80s and 90s kid, and then everyone watched the Miss America pageant. It was kind of like the Academy Awards, the Grammys, and everyone watched the Miss America pageant every year, and you rooted for your state, your contestant, and it was so fun to watch them in their talents and their formal wear. But the ending was the most interesting because that was the interview portion of the pageant. That was where each contestant had to get up and answer a question from the interviewer, something maybe on politics, education, on the world stage, something of that matter. Well, one question that was almost always asked every single year was something like this. What would you like to see happen in the world in your lifetime? And the most common answer given almost every year was world peace. I would like to see world peace. And we laugh, right? Because it's like, what a cop-out answer, right? But really, we do desire it, right? We do desire peace. It's something that we want, not only in the world, but in the environment that surrounds us. No one likes to live in a chaotic and environment filled with strife and fighting and conflict. We desire peace. But world peace on this side of eternity will not be achieved, I hate to inform you. But as moms, we have the ability and the opportunity to make a dent in this universal problem just within the confines of our home. And that is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about how we can manage conflict in our home and create more peace in our home through peacemaking tactics. Romans 12:18 says this. This is in the Bible, and God says this about peace. Romans 12:18. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. I love that he says, if possible, right? Because it's not always going to be possible. But we need to live peaceably with all whenever possible. And it just points us to our own responsibility that we have because we can control our own actions, we can control our own words, we can control our emotions. We cannot control what others do. So we need to take responsibility in creating peace as it depends on us. And as moms, we can teach our children to deal rightly and respond rightly to conflict, and we will have more peace in the home. Well, I think we can agree that none of us live in a conflict-free life. If you grew up with siblings, I'm sure you bickered and fought with your siblings. If you're married, I'm sure you've had some disagreements with your husband from time to time. Friendships are not immune from conflict. The workplace is not immune from it. It just seems like something we cannot escape. But unfortunately, when we look at conflict, all too often we give too much attention to the outward expression of fights and ignoring the inward motivation and driver behind what is driving that conflict. And the Bible has so much to say about this. The Bible tells us that conflict begins inside of us in something that is often referred to as the heart. And this is not the muscle that's in our chest. This is our inner being. This is our soul. This is who we are innately inside. And in James 4, verses 1 through 2, God's word addresses this head on with this question. It says, "What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and you do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and you quarrel." This passage is crystal clear that conflict starts inside of a person before it ever manifests into quarreling or bickering or harsh words, or even more severe conflicts such as murder that they outline here in this passage. And if we're going to try and manage conflict in our home, we need to first address the heart, where the root of conflict resides. So point number 1 on your outline is realize conflict begins in the heart. Realize conflict begins in the heart. Well, since you are at Navigating Motherhood, I'm going to assume you all have small children. And They are such a blessing. I have 3 myself, and it was so exciting when they were young especially to see them grow into their individual, unique personalities and to really document all those firsts, right? Their first tooth and their first smile and their first steps and their first words and what first foods they ate. And, you might write it down in a baby book or post it on social media. But how many of you wrote down in the baby book or posted on social media the first time your child hit another child? Or the first time your child, when you were putting him in the car seat, did the seatbelt arch, right? The car seat arch, right? Trying to make it as hard as possible. We don't document those kind of things. I remember personally the first time I ever encountered this with my firstborn. We used to go to Gymboree down the street. I don't even know if it's still there. But I would take him to this little class. He was 6 months old. And at the end of the class, they would sit these little 6 months old in a circle, and they would put down this box of these toys, and they called it the Busy Box. And they would sing this song, the Busy Box song, and then all the kids could just grab a toy. And my son went in and grabbed a toy. At the same time, another baby grabbed the toy. And the tug of war began. And I watched my son's face go from a nice creamy white to a pink, to a red, to a purple. And then he leaned forward into the other baby's face, 6 months old, guys, 6 months old, and screamed in this baby's face. And the other baby let go of the toy, and my son won, right? He won the toy. And I was mortified because I'm raising a bully. How did this happen? I thought, this has never been modeled at our home. I have never screamed in my husband's face till I turned purple. Where did this come from, right? Well, he didn't have to learn this from anybody, truly. I mean, this is something that comes quite naturally. And securing that toy at all costs is something that nobody ever had to teach him, right? It's because, truly, my little 6-month-old, he was sinning. He's a sinner. And I know it can be so hard to look at these beautiful little children and think, they're sinners, right? That seems like such a harsh word to use when you look at children. They don't know right from wrong yet. But sinning isn't always just knowing right from wrong. It's just acting in our selfish impulses. God says that it's when we do things our way instead of God's way. And that rebellion is what causes us to fall short of God's perfect and holy standard. And Romans 3:23 really gives us this in detail. It says, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." All have sinned. And that means every single one of us. That means me, that means you, that means our children, our husbands. We have all sinned and we have all fallen short of that perfect standard. And God takes sin very, very seriously because he's holy, because he's perfect. He cannot be around sin. I always think of it like an allergy, a severe allergy. If you've ever had a child or know somebody with that severe peanut allergy where it cannot even be in the air, right? You've been on an airplane, they say, don't even open the bag of peanuts because we have somebody on board that can't even breathe it. I mean, that is how God is with sin. And because of that, it's a relationship breaker. It separates us from him. And much like sin is the root of our conflict, and it can separate relationships in our real life, it separates us from our most important relationship, and that is with God. Because God takes sin so seriously, we also need to take it seriously, not only in our own lives, but definitely in the lives of the children that he has given us to raise. So if we desire to move forward towards peace and away from conflict, we need to be able to fine-tune our skills. Fine-tune our skills at detecting sins, at detecting that root of the conflict in our homes, and not just what I call pulling weeds, right? If you pull weeds and you don't get the root, they're gonna grow back, and they usually grow back bigger and worse than they started, right? So we wanna get to that root. Sin is really truly just self-centeredness. It's self-centeredness versus God-centeredness, and it can be boiled down to a few main areas. I know we can think, oh, well, how would I detect what's in my child's heart or what's in my heart? There's so many things that could be going on. But really, there's kind of these least common denominator things, and we're going to go through 3. Pride, envy, and selfishness. Most things can be filed under one of those three things: pride, envy, and selfishness. Pride is when we think more of ourselves than we should. This can look like refusing to admit when we're wrong. That's prideful. It can be refusing help when we truly need it. That's prideful. Then envy. Our senior pastor, Pastor Mike Fabaris, he wrote an entire book on envy, and it's really good. And he defines it this way: envy is when we not only want what someone else has, but also harbor resentment towards them for having it. So it takes jealousy and it ups the ante, right? And then there's selfishness. Selfishness is basically being concerned with your own interests over the interests of others, just being totally self-focused and not others-focused. And our goal should be to train ourselves and our children to be able to identify these hard issues and to be able to get to a point where we can resolve and restore relationships and have that peace that we all so desire. So let's practice together, okay? We're gonna be heart detectives. I'm gonna give you a scenario, and then you're gonna tell me what the hard issue is. All right, scenario one. Your daughter has a play date over. She has a friend over. And the friend wants to go outside and play on the swing set. And your daughter wants to stay inside and paint and color. And so she comes to you and says, "Mom, I want her to leave. She will not paint and color with me." What's the hard issue? Selfishness, right? She's not putting her friend's interest above her own interests. Okay, scenario number two. Your 3-year-old son, is putting on his shoes, and you can see that he is struggling to get them tied tight enough. So you walk over and say, "Can I help you with that?" And he snaps his head around and says, "I can do it myself." What is the hard issue? Pride. Good, you guys are on it. Okay, scenario number 3. Big brother has a birthday party, and he gets a lot of nice gifts, and one of these is the coolest, newest Nerf gun, okay? And after the party, his younger brother is sitting there like this, and you go up to him and say, "Well, what's wrong?" And he says, "Well, brother got way too many gifts for his birthday, and when he goes to sleep tonight, I'm gonna break that Nerf gun." What's the issue here? Envy, right? That actually happened in my house growing up after one of my birthday parties by my sister, so that is a true story. So it's not just enough, though, that we can identify these things. That is great, and this is something we should practice. But we need to teach our kids that these are not traits that we should be showing. These are not things we should be doing, but what could we do instead? And the Bible often uses the words put off and put on, right? We put off sinful behavior, and we put on righteous behavior. Think of it like taking off dirty, muddy clothes and putting on clean, crisp, good-smelling clothes, right? So if your child is being selfish, we need to point them to the opposite, which is to be unselfish, right? To not be self-focused, but to be others-focused. So in the case of the daughter with the friend over, you could say something like, "Hey, how could you think of your friend right now instead of yourself?" And kind of lead them to that conclusion. For pride, the opposite is humility. It's thinking less of yourself, right? Envy, the opposite is contentment, being content with what you have. So in the case of the little boy who's jealous of that Nerf gun and wants to destroy it, you could remind him that he had a birthday a few months ago and got so many great gifts. He should be content with what he has. Well, we've seen that the root of conflict, which is the sin is our hearts, is what really drives which really drives conflict. But what happens when it makes its way out? We see conflict, but then it usually goes a step further. It usually arises and then ends with responses to conflict that make everything worse, right? So when we choose to respond in ways that are just high in emotion and self-centered, it can be really, really damaging. It can be so damaging to relationships within the home, friendships outside the home, and really it never solves the problem at hand. The problem just persists and grows and gets worse. So if we want to manage conflict better in our homes, we need to, point number 2, recognize the dangerous responses to conflict. Recognize the dangerous responses to conflict. And there are 2 main categories of these dangerous responses. And the first one is the escape route. So typically these are people who do not want to engage in conflict. They want to just kind of run away from it. And then there's kind of three subcategories in the escape category. There's the runaway, there's the blame gamer, and then there's the denier, okay? So the runaway is somebody who just walks away from the conflict. They might think that they are peacekeeping, that they're keeping the peace. I'm just going to walk away from it. I'm not going to cause a fight. But really, they're being selfish. The conflict is still there. The problem is still there. The relationship has still been damaged, and nothing has been resolved. Our goal is to peace make, right? Not peace keep. The blame game, the blamer, they typically will just pass blame. Well, this happened because this person said this to me, or this situation was going on. Or for us women, we could say, this happened because of my hormones, right? Something like that, okay? We can always pass blame and not want to truly engage in the conflict. And the last one is denier. And this is the person that kind of puts their head in the sand, fingers in the air, la, 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 it doesn't exist. If I don't think it exists, it doesn't exist. Okay, very similar to the runaway, very selfish way to respond to conflict. Because again, nothing gets resolved. So that's your escape side. But then we have the other side, which is your attackers. So these people like to engage in conflict, but they don't do it in a constructive manner. Attackers, they usually use put-down words, they gossip, or they fight. So put-downs would be somebody who just fights with their words, right? They're just going to start hurling insults at you, personal insults to just try and hurt you and get some daggers out. The gossip may not put words directly to you. They're going to go tell everyone else. They're going to go tell everyone else how horrible you are, the horrible thing you did, and they're going to try to win people over to their sides. There's like team A, team B, right? And it gets really ugly really fast. And then you have the fighter. And this is literally physical fighting, okay? So this could be anything from your little toddler hitting another child to murder. I mean, these are people that physically react to conflict. And you can see these reactions are so harmful to both parties that are involved. And that's why I say that they're dangerous. These are dangerous responses. But unfortunately, these two ways are the ways most of us naturally react to conflict. They're unproductive in resolving it, and they usually make things worse, and they can end in broken relationships. So ask yourself, how do you typically respond? Would you say that you are an attacker or an escaper? And what about your kids? And that's something you guys can discuss at your tables later, but it's so important to see, how do I react to conflict? How do my kids typically react to conflict? Because that's going to help us walk them through how to resolve it better. Because when we see these responses in ourselves and our children, it should make us stop and just consider the danger that's present at the time. Because I know you've probably all experienced relationships that have been hurt or maybe even completely destroyed because of the way that we've responded to a problem with another person. And that should really motivate us to be peacemakers instead. If sinful, wrong responses lead to danger, then there has to be a better way. And there is. We're getting to the good news. There's a way to address conflict that we can work through it, that restores relationships, and inevitably it will bring everyone to a place of peace. There's other options, and they are rooted in the Word of God. They're rooted in the Word of God, who knows us best, who knows what's best for us, who knows what's best for our relationships. So if we're going to encourage more peace in our homes, we need to, number 3 on your outline, practice godly responses to conflict. Practice godly responses to conflict. Well, God is a God of peace, and as we read in that Romans verse earlier, he wants us to and desires us to live peaceably with others. But because of sin, conflict is inevitable. It's going to arise. But thankfully, God just hasn't left us to our own devices. He hasn't been like, oh, well, sin messed it all up. Figure it out. There is so much wisdom in the Bible that addresses this issue. And that's what we're going to be looking at now. God would prefer us to work out conflict with others instead of running away or attacking one another. And there's three main ways that we can work out conflict to where the result is peace. And the first one is to overlook an offense. To overlook an offense, okay? Overlooking an offense, it can be hard. I'm not going to lie. It takes putting your pride aside. It takes any sense of entitlement and bearing that and saying, I'm going to choose to forgive this person for what they did. Proverbs 19:11 says, good sense makes one slow to anger, and it is his glory to overlook an offense. It's his glory to overlook an offense. And typically the offenses that we can overlook or should overlook, they're going to be pretty minor, right? You're not going to overlook someone, coming and slashing the tires on your car, but you're going to overlook something like a genuine mistake. Just a genuine mistake. And with kids, this could be something simple as like, siblings stepping on the other one's toe, right? I mean, that can ignite World War III sometimes, but we need to teach them that, no, we can overlook these things. Forgetfulness is another area we can overlook. You forget, I forget, people forget, and we need to overlook it. It is not worth a fight. Rudeness, we've all been rude, okay? And unless it's extreme and consistent, we can overlook rudeness. And thoughtlessness, just, people that just aren't maybe thinking of others in the right way, we can overlook that. It's not worth our time, it's not worth our energy to fight over these things. Now, if harsh words, property damage, relational damage has occurred, then overlooking an offense isn't going to work. Okay, again, that's the minor offenses. We have to go into another category, and that's the talk it out category. And this is probably where you'll spend most of your time, especially with your children, is this talk it out section of how we can work through conflict together. The Bible teaches that before moving on to anything, we need to be reconciled with people. And this is laid out in Matthew 5, verses 23 through 24. He says, so if you're offering your gift at the altar, and there remember your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. God is saying here, this person is coming to worship God. He's coming to bring something to God at the altar, and God's saying, stop. If you've got a problem with your brother, go and fix that first. That is more important. And then come back to me and worship me. So if he's willing to say that about worshiping him, how much more so in every other situation? It needs to be a priority. And this kind of reconciliation, it's not the simple, like, say you're sorry, okay? I'm sure you've tried that with your kids. I know I did, and it's like, sorry. It's just words, right? They just come out, and they, I have boys, so that's how they talk, sorry, And it doesn't mean anything, right? It's not solving the heart, it's not addressing the heart issue, it's not addressing how they offended the other person and what they actually did wrong. It's not solving the problem. So let's talk through together like a common scenario that you may face in your home and how we can work through that with our kids, okay? So I have boys. This is going to be a boy situation. You have two brothers, and they're playing with trucks. And one brother takes the truck out of the hand of the other, and you hear screaming and crying, okay? I'm sure you've all encountered this in some way, shape, or form in your home. Typical situation. So what do, right? Well, you start by sitting down the child who took the truck, okay, the offender, so to speak, and you got to get to that heart issue. You've got to get them to the heart issue. But we don't want to do this in an accusing way, okay? So you don't want to sit down your child and say, in this case, they're being selfish, right? They were thinking of themselves more than their brother. You don't just sit them down and say, you were being selfish. Again, that's just going to bounce off of them, okay? You want to do something as I call like leading the witness. You want to ask them questions. You want to ask them questions that are going to lead them to the conclusion themselves. So something like this. Honey, was it wrong to grab the truck from your brother while he was playing with it? That might get him thinking. Or how about, were you thinking of yourself or your brother when you took that truck? Right? That's going to lead him to that heart issue that's going on inside of him way better than just saying you were being selfish, right? Because he's going to have to discover it on his own. But then we have to practice that put off, put on, right? We've established that he was being selfish. So you can ask something like this: what could you have done differently instead of taking the truck from his hands? And hopefully he might answer something like this: well, I could have said, hey, can I have a turn after you're done? And now he's got something in his back pocket for the future when this might arise again, okay? So this is how we can start that conversation with the offender. But we still have conflict. We have the offended, and he hasn't been addressed yet. So we can go through this kind of script of apology with our children. And the first one, number one, is to have them say, I'm sorry for, okay? So this is not a say I'm sorry. You're going to have them say they're sorry for specifically what they did, and there should not be any excuses. So it's not, I'm sorry for taking your truck, but, right? It's, I'm sorry for taking your truck. I'm sorry I snatched the truck out of your hands. Specifically saying what they did. Next, you're going to ask them, or to state specifically why it was wrong. It was wrong because I was thinking of myself, and I wasn't thinking of your feelings. So that goes back, and they're addressing that heart issue again. So state specifically why it was wrong. And then next, you're going to have them ask the other person how they can make it right. How can I make it better? How can I do better? And the other sibling might say, well, don't take my truck again. Something as simple as that in a child's mind. And then the next one is alter their behavior. So in response to that, they could say something like, okay, I promise not to take the truck again. And then lastly, number 5, ask for forgiveness. They have to ask the offended for their forgiveness. Will you forgive me for taking that truck? Will you forgive me? And now if the offended has chosen to forgive, and we hope that they do, they need to understand what forgiveness is. And forgiveness is releasing the debt completely. So if they say, I forgive you, that means they can't bring it up again. It means that it's over. It means that there is now going to be reconciliation and peace. So they need to understand that that responsibility falls on them. And so this is something we can practice with our kids. And over time, if you do this consistently, you'll notice that your role in it will be less and less and less, to where there could be a time where there's a conflict and you don't even know it happens because they're able to work through it on their own. They're able to realize that they offended another person, and how to apologize correctly and how to forgive completely. I mean, that is truly the goal, and that is where true peace comes into the home. But again, it takes a lot of practice. Well, moms, what about you? What kind of strife do you face in your home, right? Maybe it's with your husband. Maybe, let's give this scenario. You have been alone with the kids all week because your husband's been away on a business trip, doing late night client dinners and things like that. And he comes home on Friday and says, hey, would you mind if I went fishing for a few hours tomorrow morning? Right? I mean, do you feel it already, right? Like your blood starts to boil. There's 2 routes you can take, okay? You could take one route where you say something, you just go on a tirade and say, how dare you even think to go fishing after you've been gone all week? I've been, changing every dirty diaper, doing all, the bedtime routine and all the things, and then you want to go fishing? Or you could stop and you could think and you could say something like, yeah, I wouldn't mind if you went fishing for a few hours, but maybe in the afternoon, could we all go to the beach together because we missed you this week? Diffusing the situation. Now, if you choose the former, you're going to have to walk through that apology script yourself, right? Apologizing for a blow up, apologizing for losing your temper, right? But if we can be peacemakers, we will have more peace in our home. Well, there's one last option under the work it out section, and that is to get help. So if you've tried to work it out, or your kids have tried to work it out, and they're not coming to a concrete heart issue or a solution, it's okay to get help. That could be a parent, that could be a teacher, it could be a pastor, it could be a small group leader. And this is just like a kid coming and saying, hey, we've got this problem and we're not able to work it out. What's the right words I could say? Or, can you help us solve this problem? The goal is to bring peace about. So they're trying to bring in an adult or another counsel to help them do that. And we can do this as adults too, right? We can have mentors, we have pastors that we can go to. If something is like a litigation thing, we've got lawyers that know the law and what is right and wrong that we can also go to get help. But I want to make a distinction that going to get help, especially for children, is not tattling, okay? Tattling is different. Tattling is when they come in the room and say, "Mom, Sawyer hit me," and they always sing it, right? Have you ever noticed that? It's always like to a tune. "Mom," it's tattling. So that's number one. But number two, it's selfishly motivated. They're going in there to get their sibling in trouble. They are not motivated to be a peacemaker. They are not motivated to come to a solution and a resolution and a restored relationship and peace. But going and getting help is, right? The motivation is that I want to solve this problem. I want to restore this relationship. So teach them to see the difference. Proverbs 11:14 speaks to the wisdom of seeking counsel. Where there is no guidance, a people fall, but in an abundance of counselors, there is safety. Well, moms, if we're going to do this in our homes, I think I've already mentioned it a million times, we have to practice this. I hate to inform you, this is not a one and done. This is not something you can go home today and it's going to be magic and peaceful in your home. This takes such consistency and practice. And the first area we need to practice, and I'm sure you've heard this from this stage before, is modeling this. As moms, we have to model this. So our children are always watching us. They always say more is caught than taught. And so we need to model this. So if we're in a disagreement, let's say with our husband, however minor, and they see us act in pride or selfishness, they're going to emulate that too when they go into conflict. So we need to model what is right before our children and be aware. And sometimes that takes just taking a time out. Right? When you feel that blood boiling, you just say, I'm gonna remove myself from the situation till I can get all of my things in order before I speak, before I respond. So modeling it is so important. But another way that we can do this and practice it in our homes is by doing it in non-conflict situations. So while kids are going to fight and you're going to have to maybe walk through that whole scenario I just gave you, it is so beneficial to work through these things when no fights are going on. So you could give your kids a scenario like I gave you and say, hey, what would we do in this situation? What's the heart issue going on here? How would we apologize and forgive one another here? And during a non-conflict situation, it's so much easier because there's no emotions, there's no one offended. It is just so much easier, and they're working those muscles, and they're learning. Another great way is if you're watching television, okay, and you see a conflict on a show, which always arises, right? You could pause the TV and say, hey, what's going on here? What's this guy's heart issue? What do you think is going on in his heart? A great way for them to just exercise those muscles and be those heart detectives and work those peacemaking skills together, right? Because it's always easier to see it in someone else, right? But when you work those muscles, they'll be able to see it in themselves. Well, we barely scratched the surface today, ladies. There's so much on this topic. We could be here forever. But I wanted to share a book with you where I got a lot of this wisdom. It is called Peacemaking for Families by Ken Sande. And it is a biblical guide to managing conflict in your home. We do have it in our bookstore. But this goes into so much more than we even touched on today. Conflict in marriage, conflict with extended family, adult children, all the different problems that could arise as children grow, as we age, and our parents age, and things like that. What I love about this book is that it is all from God's Word. It is all God's truth, and we know that the God that created us knows us best. He wants what's best for us, and we can trust what He says. So I highly recommend this book, and I hope you guys have a wonderful small group time this morning discussing this, and thank you for having me.